Why donors leave. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm joined today by Dr. Virginia Harrison. Virginia is an assistant professor at Clemson University, where she teaches public relations and communications, and this expertise has led her to research and study donor stewardship. And Virginia, what a delight to have you with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much. I'm so privileged and excited to be chatting with you today.
Now, your background is communications,
Yes.
public relations. On your CV, I see sports. You're involved with the sports world, and yet you also research donor relations and donor stewardship. What led you into this topic?
Yeah, great question. And I'll try to keep the winding story short. But, so when I graduated college, I was a sports journalism major. I really wanted to go into sports journalism. That happened to be the year that newspapers were collapsing, and I still have a great passion for sports, but I also did some volunteering in nonprofits, and I decided to use my journalism skills to promote and to help nonprofits do their work professionally. So I pivoted into public relations, and I spent 5 years doing public relations for a university development and alumni relations office. We went through a big $2 billion campaign. We did all sorts of really cool public relations work there. And then I pivoted into 2 years of frontline fundraising. So sitting down and meeting with donors at different levels, all the way from sort of the annual giving, a couple hundred a year to major gift donors who were working on $1 million or more pledges. And then, I decided I really liked what I was doing, but I wanted to sit down and kind of dig into some of these questions, right? Like, why do donors leave relationships? And so I went back full time to get my Ph.D. And now I am in a research professor position here at Clemson and digging into some of the questions I faced when I worked in the profession. Now I get to do that kind of full time from a research and teaching angle.
Well, and as we've dived into this topic at the fundraising school, the name Virginia Harrison continues to surface as a leading researcher on this topic, which is why we're so fortunate to be having this conversation. And Virginia, I have to let you know, the fundraising school now comes full circle. Our founder, Henry Rosso, 50 years ago in San Francisco, came out of public relations and marketing to create the fundraising school. How about that?
That's wild. That's really cool.
Yep. He did some work for a nonprofit, saw a need to professionalize the field, and here we are 50 years later standing on his shoulders. What was it as you were fundraising? Again, there could be so many aspects. You talk about annual fund and major gift. And,
Right.
We know what the research says, that we're always recruiting new donors, but the largest financial return and fundraising success comes from our current donors, which also takes less time and less financial cost. What was it about stewardship that really caught your attention?
Yeah. Great question. For me, so as you mentioned, I'm from a public relations communications background. So when I look at fundraising, I think about building relationships, right? And that's kind of the core of public relations, is building relationships between organizations and supporters. So when I look at that, I think about, relationship building is about communications, right? We constitute and we create relationships through communications. So I look at stewardship and I look at fundraising through that communications angle. And so to me, stewardship, there's a whole line of research. Kathleen Kelly pioneered that here in public relations. That stewardship is about communication. It's about good communication that leads to strong, long-lasting relationships. So when I do my research, I look at those long-term relationships, right? So it's not necessarily about the people that give you $5 on Giving Tuesday, although that's a great place for them to start, right? To find your first donors. But building those relationships, so somebody who's giving you those $5 over the years will give you more each time, right? They're going to come back every year, they're going to give you more, and they're going to become more deeply ingrained into the work of the organization. So that's what I'm really interested in. I'm interested in sort of those maybe higher annual donor, major gift people who can really move the needle for an organization. So I'm looking at where those deep relationships are formed, how we can do that through communication, and kind of focusing our organizational attention there to kind of grow our donor base. So that's kind of the perspective I take when I look at stewardship. And in my research, I look at some of those not super high level donors, but those people who are really going to sustain your organization and move the needle for you every year.
Virginia, I really appreciate your answer. With the donor relationship, it is not supposed to be a one-time event.
Right.
We are walking alongside our donors, hopefully in a lifetime journey that deepens over time. And they might even start at $5 or $50 or $500 and over time become a mid-level donor, become a major gift donor, or maybe stay at that base level for us. But the idea is to have this long-term relationship. And as you studied that, you've identified reasons why donors leave. And what I love about the paper is you could have said, hey, why donors stay? But you caught our attention by saying, they might leave. So what did you find as to why donors leave?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, a lot of research focuses on, okay, how do we keep them to stay? How do we keep them to be loyal and to keep giving? And there's not a lot of research out there as to, okay, what happens when these relationships fall apart? And in my particular paper that you're mentioning, we focused on donors who had a longstanding relationship. So it's not somebody who's just going to give you $10 and they may or may not come back, right? But these are people who were board members or had a deep relationship with an organization. And after a while, they decided it was no longer worth their time and energy to be involved in that relationship. So we really were interested in, okay, what kind of caused that sudden break, right? Where things were going well and then suddenly they didn't. And there were seven factors, and we really grouped them into two categories. One of them was things that were happening with the organization or things in that relationship that started breaking down. And then also just kind of personal interests or personal changes, right? So maybe you're interested in a cause and maybe it's not as meaningful to you as you get older or something along those lines, right? So there was this kind of factor between, okay, the organization can do some things, but the other part of it is finding the right people who are going to be committed to you long term.
And one of the very first reasons you note is responsible reporting, keeping our donors informed. Could you please expand on that?
Absolutely. So a lot of the donors that I spoke to said, it was great to get an annual report or to hear how well you're doing, but I want to know how specifically my money is impacting what you're doing, right? So if you're not going to tell me exactly how my scholarship is helping students, or if I've given you money and you're not spending it, I need to know that like immediately, or tell me why it's not being spent. I don't necessarily care that it's not being spent, but I want to know why, right? Or do you have future plans? Is there something else you're waiting on? Can that money be repurposed? So it was a lot about, okay, how does my endowment or how does my $1,000 a year actually make a difference rather than saying, oh, it's going to go to our general fund? Well, tell me what $1,000 does for your general fund. How does that money every year help you move forward? So it was a lot about, I want that information to be really personalized to what I'm giving you and what I'm giving it for.
Virginia, when you talk about personalization, you also talk about not just engagement, but meaningful engagement. What's the difference between engagement and meaningful engagement that could decide the difference whether or not the donor stays or leaves?
Yeah, great question. We use the term engagement a lot. We throw that term around a lot in the profession as well as, in research. And so engagement isn't just, having somebody come to a board meeting or having somebody come to a groundbreaking and kind of celebrating and saying, hey, we did a good job, and having them like a social media post. It's more about how is that donor as an individual and what their unique capabilities and skills are. What can they bring to the organization to help that organization overall? So we heard a lot of people say, I don't want to just be a checkbook where I'm writing my annual donation and coming to a couple board meetings, but can I mentor students? Maybe there's some students that I'm giving a scholarship to in the same field that I'm in, and maybe I can give them career advice. Maybe I'm somebody with a lot of financial planning background and I can help the organization plan for a capital project, right? So there's some things that I can do, as a donor, as a human individual with some skills that I can also give back to the organization. So it's not just giving money or showing up at meetings, but what can I do to help advance the organization beyond writing that check?
A very personalized way, tailored to that particular donor. Some of the other reasons that Virginia's research highlighted, donors not receiving proper recognition, the nonprofit not following proper legal and policy issues and communicating those well, not having long-term organizational stability. Donors want to know that it's a stable nonprofit organization, and also the social match, that donors see themselves similarly with other donors to the organization. And Virginia, I like how this all leads up. And if you could expand upon this, please, from mission fit to deeper connection. Can you help our audience understand that, please?
Sure. So, I think one donor I spoke to kind of mentioned it really well or described this really well. He was saying, I care a lot about animal welfare. There's lots of great animal welfare organizations, all over the country and all over, the globe. So I'm going to give to an organization that can kind of check all those boxes for me, right? That they're easy to work with, right? They're not telling me all these different sort of legal reasons why I can't get involved. They have a good mission and they're caring for that mission. But I also know that that organization is actually going to achieve its goals, right? I'm not going to give money to an organization that's going to, disappear in 5 years, but an organization that's going to be sustained for the long term. And that goes back to good leadership as well as financial stability. And also, when I'm part of that organization, I feel like I'm part of that organization, right? I feel like the other people there, the people that work there, the other donors, the other volunteers are people that I fit in with, right? That I see myself being a part of, right? So that'll make me come back kind of over and over again to be part of that kind of community. A lot of donors were looking for that greater community that they could be part of through their philanthropy. So it's not just saying, okay, I care about this cause. Certainly that's part of it. But there's these other factors that make your organization with that cause be the right fit for me. And it goes to all of those things from good leadership, policies that I can work with, as well as making myself feel like I'm a part of this organization beyond just giving you money every year.
Virginia, one of the things I loved about that finding in particular is it might be easy for some in our audience to say, okay, Virginia's at Clemson, Bill stands at IU, they've got armies of fundraisers. They can do that, very individualized attention for each particular donor. And again, with our smaller and medium-sized nonprofits, you need to do the best you can with that personal touch, individualized to each donor on your donor database. But if people care about who they are associated with, Virginia, it also seems that stewardship maybe can happen in small groups or medium-sized groups where I can communicate with several donors who are very similar at the same time. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And that is one thing. I'm glad you brought that up, Bill. That's one thing, one critique or, I'm in a small organization. I can't do all this personalized attention to my donors. And I would say it is an important priority, even for small organizations, right, is to kind of carve out that time to be as personal as you can. But also, a lot of the donors I talked to said, I just enjoy being part of this board, right? So I'm going to give my annual donation so that I can come and be part of this organization. A lot of people talked about, I have a real great personal relationship with the executive director of this nonprofit. So absolutely, I'm going to come and I just want to hang out with this person and see the good work that they're doing. So there is a lot of that stewardship that happens outside, I don't want to say outside of the professional world, but kind of happens more naturally, I think, that maybe we don't give a lot of credit for. So finding ways to get groups of donors together, finding ways to get board members together to also socialize, I think is one thing that I was really surprised by, but also really interested to hear is it doesn't have to be, okay, I got to write this personalized letter to my donor today, or I have to make sure that they're coming to campus, to meet certain people. But it's really, again, those natural ways that we can create maybe like a community of philanthropy around, some of these opportunities that we're giving donors to be involved.
These 7 categories of findings, Virginia, I think provide a wonderful roadmap for all nonprofits, all subsectors, all budget sizes to be able to start and strengthen their donor engagement strategies. I'm also thinking, too, of the fundraiser who says, hey, my chief development officer, my CEO, my board of directors, they mean well, but they're always pushing me for the next gift. We hear that often at the fundraising school, that I'm always under pressure to get to the next gift. It would seem to me that this list of 7 categories I can use to lead up to demonstrate to my supervisors that this is actually part of fundraising.
Yeah, and I was actually, while I was thinking about talking to you today, Bill, that was one of my first things I thought of was, I think you can justify all of these activities as ways that, stewardship is leading toward that next gift, right? And it's not just saying, okay, so bringing a donor to campus to meet with a scholarship recipient isn't necessarily, okay, they're not going to write you a check at the end of that experience. But if they have a great experience, they're going to be like, maybe I'll create a second scholarship, or maybe I'll expand that scholarship so that more students can have that opportunity. So having those meaningful engagements, right? Treating donors correctly and the way that they want to be treated, giving them that social support system so they feel like they want to come back every year and stay involved, ultimately is moving them toward that next gift. And it's something that I heard too from executive directors when I worked as well, is we have to worry about, getting money in the door every day, meeting our quota or our goal. All of these activities can be done that will ultimately result, in those goals. So I would say, one of the reasons why I am interested in stewardship, going back to your first question, is that I think stewardship is key, right? Stewardship is part of cultivation. Stewardship is moving people toward that next gift. It's not something that should be overlooked because, again, like you said, if you steward someone the right way, they're going to stay engaged, right? And ultimately, in the long term, it's going to be less work and maybe more meaningful engagement that you can give them.
Summarized by our colleague Angela Altimore, who says stewardship is the fundraising that happens in between the asks. And that summarizes it quite well. Dr. Virginia Harrison, assistant professor at Clemson University. The paper is called Why Relationships Fail. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and translating your scientific research abilities into practical application for us here at the Fundraising School. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Bill. It was great. I had a great time.
And our new course on donor stewardship is part of our menu of 25 public courses leading to 5 different certificates: in person, online, virtual, and online recorded. We also can bring customized training right to your nonprofit, your region, your association, whatever the case might be, in the United States and anywhere across the world. We also have quarterly webinars, these weekly podcasts, and of course, our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, now out in the books, 5th edition. Where do you go for this information? Online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful for our producers today, Jennifer Boffman, CFRM, and our Emmy Award-winning producer, Mike Anthony. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. Now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.